911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency?
Be advised, Car 4 has control of the pursuit. Proceed with caution.
Hey, everybody. How are you guys tonight? Hi, Deb. Good to see you, my dear. Everybody be sure and thank Tech Death for my new music. I love it. He's just amazing. I can't say enough about him. Hi, CJK. How are you? Hey, Miracle Heart. Yeah, this case was described as the crime of the century. This case was huge. We're going to talk about why some of the things transpired in this case tonight. It's really quite interesting. Hey, JDR, how are you? Hi, Danger Dave. How are you? Good to see you. Yeah, I liked OJ a lot. He was not just a good football player, but he was a pretty good actor. Seemed like a really nice person at the time, especially growing up with him in the 70s. But as we all know, you don't really know celebrities. We just see what they want us to see. Hey, Mitzi Scott, how are you? So good to have you guys here. I have my daughter, Shelby, with me tonight. As you guys all know, she's waiting backstage, and I'm going to go ahead without further ado and bring her on with us. Hey, Shelby.
Hey.
How are you, my dear?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you.
I think we dressed alike today.
Yeah, well, kind of. Mine's a little bit different than
I like
yours.
yours better.
Huh?
I like yours better.
Yeah. This was the second go around of the sweatshirt, so
maybe you need to make sure I get one of those.
Okay. So everybody say hello to Shelby if you aren't, if you haven't been here before. She and I do like to cover cases together. She is a very busy mom of 3 boys, and she works in education, and she's just overwhelmed most of the time with work and home life. And so I don't get to see her on here as much as I would like, but I love it when she does join us. We always have a great conversation, and I love when we can cover these cases together.
Hold on one second.
I don't understand why that is doing that. Hold on a second, okay? I'm going to fix something because I don't like the way the screen looks.
Thank you. We're live. Other people can see you.
So that's kind of weird.
Cole wanted to say hi, but then I said we were live and everybody would be able to see him, and he ran away.
Oh, oh, darn it. I missed the kid.
He's watching hockey.
Yeah. Oh, it's that time of year. So, we're going to talk about OJ tonight, you guys. We're going to talk about the whole case. We're going to break some things down. We're going to talk about why the jury got it right. A lot of people don't believe that. In fact, I'm in the minority when I say that, but there's a lot of reasons why. And we're going to go over that. Before we get there, I do have a little bit of housekeeping that I want to do. There is a couple of things that I want to talk about first. So bear with me. I did want to say, did you guys, I figure you guys are obviously aware of what's going on with Richard Allen. I posted on my community page about it. There's been a lot of lives about it. It's all over Twitter, all over Reddit. I'm going to have a live on Saturday specifically designated to Richard Allen and what's transpired with his attorneys this week, asking for an emergency motion to get him moved out of prison back to county jail somewhere. And just briefly, I'm just going to say that I think it's a good thing that they're going to do this. From the looks of things, things are not going well at all for him in the conditions that he's being housed in. After thinking about it, because at first I was really torn about this. Shelby and I talked about this. I sent her the photograph of him right away when I saw it. And I was very, I just want to say torn, because part of me was thinking, well, Libby and Abby didn't get the same understanding, but, she brought me back to where we need to be with true reality here, guys. Richard Allen is innocent. He has not been proven guilty in a court of law. Therefore, he doesn't even belong housed in prison right now. He belongs in a county jail somewhere. And from what they've described, there's a couple of things in there that I think are kind of strange. And the more I started thinking about it today, I really wonder if this is the defense's tactic. And that's why I prefaced what my show will be about on Saturday. Is he truly ill, or is this a defense that they're beginning to build? That he has mental problems, he's emotionally whatever, and he's not going to be fit to stand trial. I mean, these are all, they're talking about schizophrenia. They're talking about delusional. They're talking about some serious mental health problems. So we'll get it all into that on Saturday. But I just, that's just my take on it. I'd like to see him moved, rehoused in a county somewhere, and also make sure that he's being treated well, so that there isn't going to be something that can be done on appeal in this case because of how he was treated beforehand. I thought it was extremely interesting that we didn't hear anything today out of the judge because I figured it was an emergency that she would respond immediately. So let's see if something happens tomorrow, because nothing has broken on my case. I've been watching it all day, and there is absolutely nothing there. And I'm really sorry, but Finn's losing his mind back here. So if you see him jumping around, I apologize. So Shelby, do you want to just chime in and say what you told me about Richard Allen?
What? You said it. I think in these kinds of cases, we have to remember that even though what they did, the crime that they're accused of doing, is inhumane, we have to treat them humanely, even if that's not our first instinct, because if we don't, that makes us no better than them. So he does deserve to be in a safe environment where he can, the pictures are kind of just bad, the way he's changed his physical appearance, in my opinion.
I was floored when I saw that picture of him.
Like he's lost a ton of weight.
He lost a ton of weight the last time he was in court. We all kind of saw that when he was coming down the stairs in the courthouse, but he was still dressed in the jumpsuit, so it was kind of baggy on him. He had this big coat on, and I know he had Kevlar on, so it was really hard to tell, but I could see it in his face. But man, he has really, really changed.
And a lot of that could be the stress
for sure,
of the situation that he's found himself in, whether he's guilty or not. That is got to be scary.
I can't believe, though, that they're getting away with not allowing him to visit his family or see his family for visits.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Again, that's not the way the country's supposed to be run. Yeah, he's arrested, but he has his day, he gets his day in court. And the only other thing I wanted to say is he waived his right to a speedy trial. So in doing so, this is kind of, it's kind of his fault, because he could have gone to trial much sooner had he not done that, and they would have been forced to. But again, this case being what it is, we all know why he didn't, and all the things that have to be done by the defense before they can even begin to think about. We're talking 100, I think they said 100,000. Deb, tell me for sure, because I know you're in here, pages of evidence. That's paper, guys, that they have to go through. Well, and they have to go through line item by line item.
That's actually a good segue into the O.J. Simpson case.
Yes. Yeah, for sure it is. But like I said, I just want him to be taken care of, and I would like to see him back out of, thanks, Deb. I would like to see him out of prison and back in county, and we'll talk about that on Saturday. The only other thing I wanted to say before we get into OJ was there was the remains of a First Nation woman discovered in Winnipeg, in a Winnipeg landfill. And I just wanted to bring that up because obviously I'm covering the missing and Indigenous women and children this year on my channel. They found her body on Monday afternoon, and Inspector Sean Pike said that workers at the Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg South End called police around 3:00 in the afternoon. He identified the body as Linda Mary Beardy, a 33-year-old mother from the community of Lake St. Martin in Manitoba's Interlake region. They said that her death is suspicious. She was living in Winnipeg, and they are not sure if her death is related to more victims and other cases from around the area, because there are a lot of missing women and also women whose bodies have been found. They did say that the remains of two victims, Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, are believed to be in the private Prairie Green landfill just north of Winnipeg, while those of Rebecca Contois were found in the Brady landfill last June. So it is possible that they have a serial killer working up there near Winnipeg that are killing these women and putting them in landfills. There's the remains of a fourth unidentified Indigenous female named Buffalo Woman by First Nations elders, and she has not been found. Skibicki has pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. And Jeremy Skibicki is a man from Winnipeg who has been charged last November in connection with homicides of 4 Indigenous women in the area. So they are looking at him right now for this one as well, but they have not been able to tie him to it as of yet. Obviously, it's early. So hold on a second, guys. My magic mouse, as everybody knows, is a headache for me. Just told me that it's about to die. So we don't want that to happen during the live stream. That would be awful. So give me a second while I get it plugged in. I should have checked that earlier today. The best laid plans of mice and men. So anyway, that was my update on that situation, and I wanted you guys to be aware of it. Okay, so we're going to talk about the OJ case tonight, as you guys all know. For those of you that were not born yet or did not live through the OJ case, OJ Simpson was a U.S. athlete, pro athlete, and college athlete who won the Heisman Trophy and became one of the best running backs of all time in the National Football League. He went on to do commercials. He was a spokesman for Hertz. Everybody in the 70s and 80s can remember him running through the airports, jumping across chairs and everything to run to get to his car. Hertz was helping him sell their product, or he was helping Hertz sell their product. And everybody knew him from that. And then he became an actor. And he started acting in movies. He was in the Naked Gun movies. He was in a lot of cameos in some of the movies like The Towering Inferno. He was in that movie. There are just a lot of things that he did. And as a celebrity, he was very, very well known, and people loved and adored him. He was a hero to our children. Boys would grow up wanting to be OJ. And so it was quite a shock in June of 1994 when his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, was murdered, and her friend Ron Goldman. It was quite a shock to everyone that soon after that, OJ would be charged with the murders. I think that people knew a little bit that followed Hollywood about OJ and Nicole's relationship. People who, read the tabloids knew that they had had problems in the past, but nobody knew what the extent of the spousal abuse was until this trial happened. So it brought to light domestic violence. The trial also brought to light the first time that DNA would ever be used in a criminal case anywhere. It was the first time that it was used. It came on the cusp of some of the worst rioting in Los Angeles County history. The racial tensions in the city and the county was at a peak. And for a lot of reasons, people thought that this case became almost symbolic of race relations in the country, because there came a point and a tipping point where the majority of whites believed that OJ was guilty and the majority of blacks believed he was innocent. And so there was that racial divide, and the country, saw that. One of the other things that happened in the case, and that we will talk about as well, is that this is the first time cameras were allowed in the courtroom, and it became a media circus. Now, we talked about media circuses just the other night on my live with Delphi. This was beyond anything we've seen with Delphi. They literally had circus performers outside the courthouse performing for the people that were gathered there every day. This trial took 8 months. The jury was sequestered that entire time. They weren't allowed to see their family. They weren't allowed to have contact with the outside world. They were kept under lock and key. They were taken to, I believe, a Dodger game as entertainment. They got to go to Disneyland at one point. But these were all special outings, and they had sheriff deputies with them. The interviews with the jury would later state they really got sick and tired of being locked up. But the media, Nancy Grace for comes to mind, really. She made her name for herself on this case. It blew up on Court TV and CNN headline news. Back then, they had just, that's all you saw was OJ. Everything was talking about the OJ trial. And they basically...
The OJ trial is what made Court TV.
Yes.
That's what gave Court TV its kickstart. So I was a freshman in high school when this case happened, and I remember coming home quickly from school to catch the end of the day trials once school had started back up, because I watched it. I followed it. It was probably one of the very first cases that I ever dove into.
Hi, Nick. How are you? Good to see you. Hi, Jeff. Good to see you guys. Thank you for joining. It truly was a spectacle. The lawyers in the cases, especially OJ's lawyers, they became known as the dream team. It was called that because OJ had a ton of money. OJ was very wealthy, and he had the money to buy the best defense team that money could buy. He had amazing experts, experts in the DNA field, experts in criminology. He had experts in forensics. He had we'll talk about them, but some of the experts, they really got their jumping off point with this case as well. And now they're world renowned in their field because they have so been looked back from that point, from that case. The attorneys themselves, Effley Bailey. Effley Bailey was an amazing attorney, and he wrote a lot of books, and a lot of people didn't like him. But I want to tell you that man and his interrogation on the witness stand of Mark Furman, who was the police officer that went over the wall at OJ's house and found evidence, he absolutely fried him on the witness stand. He asked him point blank if he had ever said the N-word, and he blatantly came right out and lied and said no. And Effley Bailey knew that was a lie. He had tapes of him from 10 years before where he was helping a woman who was writing a book. And he, on those tapes, the racist person that he was came out. And those tapes ended up being played in the trial. And man, was that a turning point for the case. But, Johnny Cochran was no slouch. Johnny Cochran was the lead attorney after Robert Shapiro basically stood back and said, go ahead. There was a lot of A personalities on his defense team, and there was a lot of struggle between them on how they were going to handle the case and which way they were going to go. Johnny Cochran was accused of using the race card and using it to benefit OJ by talking about race and talking about rush to judgment and talking about some of the things that had happened in LA County prior to this. And, you know, it may have very well been true that part of that was done, but that's not the reason that the jury got it right. That has nothing to do with why, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with why the jury got this case right. There was so many mistakes made in the very early morning hours of this case. We had detectives who didn't arrive for hours after they were notified by the patrol officers that they had a double homicide on Bundy. This was in a very well-known part of LA called Brentwood. And this is where the affluent live. This is where the rich and famous play and work and live. And they didn't have these kinds of crimes there. And the fact that the detectives were slow in responding really was kind of crazy, but the way they kind of trickled in. One of the things we're going to talk about, and I know Shelby wants to talk about, is that they got the timeline wrong. The prosecution absolutely forced a narrative of a timeline.
One of the places we have to start is the fact that it was not OJ's defense team's job to prove his innocence. It was the prosecution's job to prove him guilty. And their very first mistake was they overshot their case in large. The timeline is extremely tight and unrealistic. I think when we were talking about it on Saturday, there are eyewitnesses and people who had walked past Nicole's house that the police had spoken to, that had heard the arguing or scuffling or whatever, well after OJ would have been on his plane to Chicago.
Yes.
Yes. And so that right there kind of pokes some doubt in, is this plausible that he did this?
Yeah. And, you know, you've got OJ's dream team consisted of Robert Shapiro. It consisted of, F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, Robert Kardashian, which everybody now knows the name Kardashian, but they don't know why. Most people don't realize that Robert Kardashian was an attorney, but he was OJ's friend from college. They went to college together, and they were friends from college. And when Robert Kardashian was married to the current Kardashian mother that everybody knows, Kris Jenner, she was 17 years old when she met OJ. That's when she met Robert. And they became running around as friends. And then Robert and Kris Jenner got married, and they had this relationship as friends. And so Robert was called into this dream team. He really truly wasn't practicing law much anymore for OJ, but he would do things for him when he needed. And when OJ asked him when this all happened, you know, Robert said, of course, I will help you any way that I can. So he sat on his side at the defense table. but he really wasn't doing much work for the defense team. He was just basically there. So this was high powered, and Bernie Scheck was the expert in the DNA field. Bernie Scheck at the time during when this started was one of the top experts in the country on DNA evidence. And the way he broke that down for that jury was unbelievable and boring. The poor jurors it was also way over their heads. You could just see them, the way everybody was talking about them, how they would just kind of not really doze off, but they just were not really paying that much attention to the DNA evidence in the very beginning.
Well, I think that you have to remember, so this was 1994. And like Mom said earlier, this was the first time that DNA had ever been used in the court of law as actual evidence. So it was extremely new technology and science. So the way we see DNA now and the way that the average person would understand it, these jurors, this was all a foreign language to them when he would talk about, RNA and DNA and why this would match somebody and not match OJ or whatever the case may be.
Hey, Sleuth, how are you? Good to see you, my dear. And you are absolutely right. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to.
Famous words from a closing argument by Johnny Cochran. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And we're talking about the gloves that were found. One glove was found at the Bundy crime scene under a bush, and another glove was found behind the guest house on Rockingham, which is the address where OJ lived, which was just a few minutes from Nicole's condo. And so do you like it? I love it, Sleuth. Thank you so much. I think it's pretty cool too.
I want to say that might be one of the most damaging things that the prosecution ever did. OJ should not have tried that glove on in front of a jury. The jury should have been out of the room. The first thing I think anybody knows when you're an attorney that you learn, you don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to. And the prosecution had no idea if that glove would fit OJ Simpson or not. And I know I've heard everyone's argument, oh, well, he spread his hands out wide. If you look at that glove, OJ Simpson was a big man. He was a receiver. His hands are big. So the average glove is not going to fit his hand. And that glove didn't even come halfway down.
No, it's funny because I watched an interview not too long ago with Robert Shapiro. It was one of the interviews, one of the few interviews he's given about the case since the case happened. And Robert Shapiro said that he put the gloves on himself and they barely fit him. And OJ's hands were huge compared to his. And he knew right then that they could win the case because the gloves didn't fit. And they didn't fit OJ. And Chris Darden, one of the prosecutors of the case, he was an African American, which was always interesting why they chose him and put him on the case, but I believe it was race related.
Their whole choice for the two prosecutions in this case couldn't have been worse.
Yeah, they really weren't good choices. But anyway, with that being said, Chris Darden made a huge mistake that day when he asked him to put those gloves on when he did not know what the outcome was going to be. Now, Gil Garcetti was the district attorney for Los Angeles County at the time. And Gil Garcetti was adamant about being reelected. So his whole point was, we have to win this case. We have to. And one of the things that Robert Shapiro said in the interview that I saw was one of the other things that made him realize that they would win the case was the very day that Judge Ito looked at the defense and said, "When do you want to set the trial date?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Your Honor, we are ready to go." And Ito looked at him and said, "Okay," turned and looked at Marcia Clark, the lead prosecutor, and said, "Miss Clark, call your first witness." And she turned white and pale. You could tell, he said, at that very moment that the prosecution didn't expect that, and they were not ready. They were not prepared for them to just say, "Go ahead and go." And that was what Robert Shapiro said about that part of the case. They made some real big blunders. Their choice, like I said, to have one of the worst witnesses that they possibly could have in their case from the state. They allowed him to testify, and he was, Mark Furman was just not a good witness.
No.
And it hurt their case.
So look at CJK's comment. So you are entitled to believe that he's 100% guilty. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not here to argue whether he's his guilt or innocence. What I am going to say is that if you're sitting on a jury, you have to only look at the evidence that is presented to you. There was no evidence presented about steroids or hand exercises, or there was some discussion on whether the glove had shrunk and that sort of thing. The bottom line is he tried that glove on in a court of law in front of the jury, and it didn't go on his hand. That is the only evidence that you as a juror are allowed to make a decision based upon. You can't take into any other prior knowledge, any other prior experiences, nothing. You can only go by what you're presented.
What I don't think that a lot of people are willing to accept, the way our jury system works, and I'm hearing this with Richard Allen right now too. My inbox and my email is flooded. And a lot of people are mad because of what I said in my short that I put out today. He's innocent. He is innocent. He has not been in a courtroom in front of his peers and been proven guilty by a jury or by a judge. That hasn't happened for Richard Allen. When we go to court in this country, evidence has to be presented. And only the evidence that's presented is what a jury is allowed to deliberate on, not on how you feel, not on whether or not you think he's guilty, not on whether or not you believe he did it. Did they prove he did it? That's where the rub is.
And then
it's not easy. It's not easy to be on a jury and have to figure that out.
Evidence in this case is the blood evidence. If you go and you read and you look, that crime scene was horrific. Nicole and both Ron Goldman fought for their lives. They did not go lying down. So whoever did commit this murder would have had some kind of bruising or marks or scratches or other kinds of wounds, which he was missing. All of those. This crime wasn't committed with a firearm. It was a blade of some sort, and it was brutal. And there was blood everywhere. And if he had used his Bronco, that would have transferred. He'd have been covered. How do you explain the lack of blood evidence in his vehicle? They found 3 small dots.
Yes.
Of blood in his car.
Very small dots.
And the only wound that he had was a small cut on his finger where he said he had
on his knuckle. It was on his knuckle.
On his knuckle where he had smashed a glass or something like that.
He smashed a glass in Chicago when Van Adder called him and told him that Nicole had been murdered.
Yeah. So that was a huge hole in the prosecution case. Again, the burden lies with the state. They have to prove it. And they have to prove it with beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
And they failed to do that on every possible occasion. The police walked into that house that day and saw pictures of Nicole and OJ, and they had tunnel vision. They never looked at any other leads that anybody ever gave them, and they had plenty.
There was contamination of the crime scene by the forensic team from LA, the crime scene techs. There was corruption in Los Angeles County that was rampant in law enforcement. And there were people that believed in conspiracy and cover-ups. Now, I don't believe there was a conspiracy in the OJ case at all, but I do have a problem with two seasoned detectives carrying around evidence instead of taking it, and the chain of evidence is very important. And once evidence is obtained, there are strict rules on what you have to do with it and where it goes. And Van Adder carried a tube of OJ's blood that he gave voluntarily from Bundy to Rockingham and back to Bundy. And then he took it to the county and logged it. That's not how that's supposed to work. And once that came out, they found out that once that came about and they realized what had happened, the defense jumped on that and they presented it at trial and they questioned Fung. Dennis Fung was the, hey, Justice. Dennis Fung was the lead crime scene investigator, and he bungled so much stuff. And they talked about the fact that the vial, when the lab got it, was missing blood. Where did that blood go? Why was there blood missing? When you don't have a chain of evidence that is the way it's supposed to be, and you've got detectives dragging blood evidence from a crime scene to a defendant's or suspect's house, there's a problem.
So look at CJK's comment. His shoes matched the footprint. He had motive and means. They found some blood, enough for me. I believe his celebrity is why he walked. So first of all, are you talking about the footprint that they found at Nicole's house?
There were multiple footprints.
Because first of all, can you prove that that footprint was made the night of the murder, or was that footprint there from earlier? His children lived there. There's reason to believe that he would have been at that house, and so his footprints would be there. I mean, some blood, we're talking, they found like pinpricks of blood and it was his blood. They didn't find any blood of Nicole or Ron Goldman on OJ, in his vehicle, in his house. None. There was none.
There was one drop of Nicole's blood found on his sock that was laying in his bedroom. And it was one tiny drop. And again, I'm going to show you guys some pictures here in a minute. And I want everybody to be aware these are graphic as far as the blood. So if you guys are squeamish, you may not want to look at these. But I am going to show you what the crime scene looked like and why whoever committed this crime would have been covered in blood. And that Bronco would have been bloodied everywhere.
He would have had to have gotten rid of the Bronco.
Do I believe that O.J. Simpson is guilty? I believe that he had a hand in this murder. Do I believe he committed it? No. I believe somebody else committed this murder. And I don't know if he paid somebody to do it or if it has to do with drugs, because there's a big part of that the police never looked at. They never talked to anybody about that information.
And I'm not into victim blaming, but Nicole was not.
Yes.
She didn't walk the straight and narrow. We'll just put it that way.
Right.
That does not mean that she deserved at all what happened
She
to
lived
her.
a party life.
But I'm just saying she put herself in positions that could compromise
Yeah.
her. OJ had paid off her drug debts a couple of times.
Right. Hold on a second, guys, because I'm just getting these photos together while we're talking. But the blood evidence to me is huge.
Yeah,
because I just, in my head, I can't get that out of my brain as to, because you talk about a timeline being tight for Delphi. This timeline's even tighter from the time they're saying that he went there and did this and got back home and was able to be freshly showered, cleaned, and ready to get into a limo.
Yeah,
it's just impossible.
And cleaned his vehicle.
And cleaned the vehicle. Right, exactly. So let's take a look at some of these photos, you guys. First of all, I want to show you, hold on a second, and let me present.
I think you have to understand, like, when you stab somebody, there is splatter. It's not, so it's going to transfer onto you, especially if you hit an artery.
Oops. Why is this not? One of these days, you guys, I will learn this format one of these days. I'm telling you. It is crazy how I can't get.
You do this every week?
Oh, shoot. Okay, there it is. Let's close out of that.
Did you get dairy-free ice cream?
Don't want them to see my photo. Hold on, guys. I'm sorry. These aren't as easy as it seems.
And CJK, you're right. You're right. He could have done that, but again, we don't have evidence that happened. So you can't
assume anything in a trial. When you're sitting there as a juror, you can't assume, and you can't say, well, this happened, he ditched the clothes. Yeah. They had no evidence of that. It was never presented.
And it was never presented. And there is, he handed, when he returned from Chicago, there is video of him handing off to Kardashian a garment bag. And that garment bag disappeared. And nobody knows what was in the garment bag.
Yep.
But you can't, that was never.
The garment bag, according to Kim Kardashian, is still in her dad's storage unit that they have with all of his stuff. And that they looked in the garment bag and there was nothing in there but clothes. Now, that was years later. But I'm just saying, that was never checked into either by police. When Robert Kardashian took it the morning that OJ returned from Chicago, and was at Rockingham. Now I'm going to show a picture here of this is the Rockingham address where OJ lived. This house has since been destroyed. They tore it down in 1998. They demolished it and somebody bought the property and built a new house. But anyway, it was a beautiful property. It was on a corner. So it was a corner lot and it was a pretty big estate. There was a pool house. There was a guest house and very large property. But this is the driveway leading up to the front door, which is here. And this driveway comes down to a metal gate that it was gated. So you couldn't just walk onto his property. There was a gate that was there, which is pretty important because when the 3 detectives show up at his house after they left the Bundy crime scene, they say they came here to notify him of Nicole Brown's murder, which I think was interesting. And this has been said, this was brought up many times over the years. Why would they go to an ex-husband's house to notify first of an ex-wife being killed? They said they were only doing notification. We all know, and I think the defense knew, that was bull. That was not what they were going there for. They had already assumed and felt that he was guilty. And so they were going there, and they were listening to a detective, Mark Furman, who had been involved with OJ and Nicole previously in a domestic violence situation. He was one of the detectives who showed up when OJ had hit Nicole. And so he was already aware of that. And so they ran with it. And when they got there and they buzzed and nobody came to the door, or nobody buzzed or let them in or talked to them, that's when Mark Furman said, well, let me just jump this wall. Again, you don't do that as detectives. Law enforcement don't do that. You can't just jump the wall into somebody's property without a search warrant. You can't just go there. Now, they said to get away with that, they said, oh, well, we didn't have any way of knowing that OJ might have not been murdered. I mean, that's a stretch, you know? I mean, we're talking, everybody wants to believe the stretch the other direction, but they don't want to believe that one. I'm like, what? So I knew that was kind of creepy and crazy. And so here you've got these 3 detectives acting bizarre as heck. We still don't even have the coroner at Bundy yet. The bodies are still laying there. And we've got 3 lead detectives not on the scene. They left and went to Bundy, all 3 of them, or went to Rockingham, all 3 of them. And that to me is just a huge, huge red flag. Now here, this next picture that I'm going to show you is a picture. CJK was talking about the Bruno Mollies. And these are the shoes. Hold on a second. These are the shoes that,
No, that's me.
I know. These are the shoes, and I know it's hard to see. I'm going to try and make it bigger. This is a shoe print, they're saying, right here. This is what they're saying was a shoe print in the blood. This is Nicole's blood. This is Nicole's shoulder right here. And this is her part of her hair. But this is what they were saying was a shoe print. And you can see the massive amount of blood. And this isn't even the beginning of it. This is just a little bit of blood around her. It's far worse than this.
I think Goldman was hurt worse than she was.
And they both were hurt horrifically.
Well, yeah, but I just mean
photos of both of them can be found out there on the internet, and unfortunately I found them and I wish I had not. Whoever did this to them is a complete and utter monster. But anyway, I'm going to just show some pictures here and then we can do some more talking. This next picture that I'm showing is a picture of the chase that happened. Everybody's heard of the OJ chase. This is a picture of Al Cowling. Al Cowlings was his best friend, and he drove OJ's white Bronco, which is the same Bronco that they said he drove over to Bundy when he committed the crime. And he's driving, and OJ's in the back of the Bronco with a gun, money, and had a gun to his head. And they're driving down the 501, I believe, in out in Los Angeles. And you can see all the police cars. I mean, this was
helicopters, news helicopters following. I remember this.
This was unbelievable. They had
one headline news, MSNBC live.
This was everywhere. Everybody was watching this.
Yes.
There were people chanting on top of the overpasses, "Go, go, OJ." Everybody was clapping for him and everything. And at the time that this was happening, Robert Kardashian appeared at a news conference with a suicide note from OJ, and he read it on live TV, and he said that OJ was not able to deal with any of this, and that he was going to say goodbye. Well, according to OJ, he was going to go to Nicole's grave, because Nicole's funeral had already happened and had already been buried, and that's where they were supposedly going, was to her grave. But eventually he was able to be talked down by police and talked into going home back to Rockingham and turning himself in. And they were able to do it without incident. And there's been speculation over the years that his son was involved in this. There's been speculation that there could have been issues with Ron Goldman, and something happened with him that caused this. There's been speculation that Faye Resnick was one of Nicole's really good friends, and she was living with Nicole at the time, and she had a really bad cocaine habit.
And they looked very similar.
And they looked a lot alike.
Yep.
And both of them, there was always the assumption that it could have been someone who mistaken Nicole for Faye, because she owed a lot of money to a very well-known drug dealer for cocaine. And so there's just been a lot of things. But the thing to remember here is that the prosecution didn't pursue any of that.
Nope.
They didn't look at that. They didn't even give it a second notice. They didn't investigate it. They didn't talk to anyone. They said that was all. No, that none of that happened, even though they had eyewitnesses who heard multiple voices, and especially when someone would have been leaving at the back of Nicole's condo, and it sounded like more than one person. And the gentleman who told this story and recounted this on the stand, he was completely sure of what he had heard, and he was watching the news. And there was another lady who was watching the news and had her windows open, and she heard dogs barking, she heard screaming, she heard fighting, and all of that, what she heard, happened somewhere around 11:05. And they assumed, the prosecution, that the murders took place between 10:15 and 10:40, somewhere between 10:15 and 10:40. They couldn't get any more specific than that, even though Nicole had had dinner just hours before she died. They could never get closer than that. I often wondered if they re-looked at some of this evidence, if they could make heads or tails out of it now with what we know. But anyway, the woman who said that said she was absolutely positive because she was watching some show on television and she was able to tell them what TV it was or what TV show it was. And she gave that report to a canvassing police officer early on. No one ever contacted her again. She was never brought in to testify in the court case. It's as if they left that out because that was something that didn't
fit their narrative.
Yeah,
It
it didn't fit the
their
narrative.
timeline.
And it's against the law to leave out evidence that will show that your client or your suspect is innocent. You have to show everything. So the fact that they didn't divulge her is really suspect, especially when it completely blew up their timeline as to when things were going on.
So I
There
think
was another couple who were out walking. They had had dinner that night at a restaurant, one of their favorite restaurants in the neighborhood, and were walking back home. And they walked past Bundy, and right across, I'm going to show it to you in a minute, right across Nicole's stoop where where you would have seen the blood and you would have seen her body. And there was nothing. There was no sounds. It was absolutely silent. It was quiet. And this was at 10:40 p.m. So, I mean, these are all, like I said, these are all things that are in the timeline
and
that
I think
don't add up.
As an investigator and a prosecutor, I think you come up with your initial theory. I think Perry's talked about this on Mom's channel several times. And then you start looking at evidence and you try to fit that into what your theory is. But as you find evidence that doesn't fit into your theory, you have to be open and honest and look at different possibilities. And that's what they didn't do. They tunnel visioned on O.J. Simpson, and they ignored everything else and any other possibilities. The only evidence that they went on that this couldn't have been Ron Goldman that people were after was that his dad testified to his character and how his son lived his life. There was no other evidence, so to speak, on why would Ron Goldman have not been the person that they were after, and Nicole Brown Simpson was just caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. So there's other, there's other avenues that they just never even looked at. Good old Cato.
Yeah, this is Cato Kalin, who lived in the guest house behind OJ. Cato became a spectacle among himself. He played to the camera. He was something to watch. Seriously.
Yeah, he was.
If you ever get a chance to go watch the live of the trial, you need to
whatever
watch.
Happened to him.
I know.
Where's Cato now?
You need to watch and see, because he was an aspiring actor. OJ was giving him a place to stay. That night around, I want to say it was like
9 something, wasn't it?
9:30, 9:45.
They got dinner.
OJ came and asked him if he wanted to go get a bite of dinner. And Cato said, sure. So they got in the car and they drove to McDonald's. They went through a drive-through at McDonald's and they got food. And they drove back to Rockingham, and OJ went inside to eat his dinner, and Kalin took his in to his room to eat dinner and ended up on the phone with his girlfriend. And Cato said that when he was talking to his girlfriend, he was laying in his bed, and he heard these thumping sounds on the outer wall by his head, which would have been between a fence and the wall. There was a fence and then a little walkway there and this wall. And he said he kept hearing this thump, and he was so good about how he did it, thump, thump. And he didn't know if it was an earthquake at first. And he asked her what was going on, if there was an earthquake. And she's like, no. And he didn't know what the heck it was. And he didn't think any more about it until police showed up, knocking on his door, waking him up, getting him out of bed, and asked him where OJ was and if he was okay. And he's like, well, OJ's in Chicago. And they were like, well, and then Arnell, which is OJ's daughter, She lived in the room 2 rooms down from him, because this guest house had more than one room, and Arnell lived in one of the other ones. And she came out and they were like, we need to find your father. We need to know.
CJK, we're not saying Cato is a suspect.
Cato is not a suspect.
Cato
was
not
never a suspect.
No, not even in the slightest.
Cato was not a suspect in this in these murders.
He was just an interesting character, witness, or whatever.
Hey, Dustin.
Oh, Dustin.
How are you, Dustin? Good to see you, my friend.
Was he seriously in the Sharknado sequel?
I did not know he was in one of the Sharknado sequels. So he is making it. Cato was in the Sharknado sequel.
Cato's doing just fine.
So anyway, so they had dinner and all of this happened and police showed up. And that's when Arnell was like, what's going on? And then they proceeded to tell her that Nicole had been murdered along with her friend. And she went in the house. She was very, very upset as soon as they told her, which anyone would be. But anyway, so that's Cato. And he, like I said, he took over the trial for a while. He really was
on the stand for like, what, 2 days?
Oh, longer than that. He was on the stand longer than that. And he was,
JDR, so as to your comment about eyewitnesses, eyewitnesses can be unreliable. You are absolutely right. But when you have multiple witnesses who can verify their estimation of time with time-stamped shows or news broadcasts, or, what time they finished dinner and were walking home, and all of those things coincide, that gives you're not just looking at like 3 different people who are giving you 3 different stories. You're looking at 3 people who don't know each other, who are all reporting things that happened around the same time. You can't ignore that. And they never investigated it. That's the point. You say we're focusing too much on that. I'm saying they didn't focus on it at all. They didn't look into it at all.
Dave, you are so correct. The amount of blood at the crime scene, OJ would have been soaked. These are the jeans, the blue jeans that Ron Goldman was wearing. One of the things about Ron Goldman and the time, I mean, you have to remember this was 1994, but he was wearing white tennis shoes, completely white tennis shoes. He had on white socks, and he had his jeans kind of pulled up with his socks bunched down. Do you remember that look, Nicole, when kids were kind of dressing that way, where you had that scrunchy sock kind of look? Where your socks,
you tucked your pants in.
We're pushed down or whatever.
We can't talk about it.
But that's what he was wearing. Plus, he was wearing a white shirt. The amount of blood that was on him is unbelievable, and his injuries were unbelievable. He was killed in a very tight space. I can't show it to you because the only photographs of that space is with him in it. And I'm not doing that. I won't do that. But I'm just telling you, it was a very, very tight space. And he and Nicole were very close to each other. I mean, they were so close to each other. It's incredible. I always thought that there was probably more room than that. Then when I really started looking at these photographs.
I always thought that it was extremely interesting. I'm not so sure that only one person was capable of doing what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Is it's one. And JDR, you can think that OJ did it 100%. That is your opinion. We aren't we aren't discussing opinions here tonight. We are discussing what
Facts.
the facts and what the jury was presented at trial.
Yes.
My
I'm not
personal
talking about what
opinion-
we think or what we think we know.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that Lacey Peterson stopped walking her dog because
Nope.
of her pregnancy. Pregnant women are not they're not invalids. She was having a completely normal pregnancy. She was a very small, healthy woman. There was no reason for her to not be walking her dog. So that's not
the
true
fashion
at
was
all.
awful back then. Oh my gosh. Let's again.
Hang on a second. And then the other character in this case, because there was a lot, you guys, there was a lot of characters in this case, would be Judge Ito himself.
Oh Lord.
Judge Ito was.
Can we have a sidebar?
Oh my gosh.
Can we have a sidebar?
You know, I believe there was a point where he lost control of his courtroom. And it just became a circus in there. They were constantly having sidebars and stopping the proceedings for this, that, and the other, or he had to admonish the prosecution, or he got mad. I mean, he got mad. I can't even believe how often this man lost his cool at these both sides, the prosecution and the defense. So anyway, hang on a second. You guys need to listen to Steve from True Crime Web, because he can talk to you about the time of death and how the pooling of blood and when rigor mortis sets in, and how your blood pools depending on how you're laying when you're killed, and especially when you're killed violently like this. There are many ways to tell the temperature of the body. There are so many different ways to tell when someone died. So there is
and even if you want to stick with the
timeline, it is not impossible to tell the time of death.
And for the sake of argument, let's just say that time of death is accurate. He was going to McDonald's with Kato Kalin at 9:30, and the murder happened between 10:15 and 10:45. So he had to go to McDonald's, go back to his house, go inside, wait for Kato to get in his house, and then secretly leave and make his way over to Buckingham and commit one of the most brutal murders I've ever seen. And then get back in his vehicle and drive back to his house, clean his car, ditch his clothes, shower, and get in a limo. Mom, what time was the limo? Time did he go? Did he leave? I know the limo driver said he had a hard time.
It was at 10:50. He was supposed to be ready at 10:40, but he wasn't. No. And the limo driver couldn't get him.
Okay, so there you go. So
he was in the shower supposedly at that time.
So the murder happened between 10:15 and 10:45. Even if it happened at 10:15, we'll give him that 10:15. That's still that's a half an hour, roughly, a little bit more. But if it happened, let's say 10:30, there's no way. There's no way.
Now, this is the front of Nicole's walkway. Right out here is the sidewalk, the public sidewalk. And this is the entryway. This is path that goes in here. There is a metal
fence. This where the people would have been walking home from?
Yes, right dinner? Here. Yes.
How would you miss that?
And this is the brush, or she had a lot of foliage and a lot of tall trees right here. And I could show it to you, but if I did, you would see her because she's laying right here, and I don't want to show that. So, but I can show you, you can see the footprints. There's footprints. To me, that's a footprint. Mm-hmm. It almost, I mean, I can't tell if it is, but it looks like it. Yeah. But you can see the dog prints for sure, because her Akita walked through this and came and he was all bloody all over his feet, all over his paws were all bloody. He had blood on him, and he was out wandering. He was a mess. Obviously, he knew
Didn't
what had
neighbors
happened
find
here.
him?
Pardon me?
Didn't neighbors find the dog?
Yes. One of the neighbors down the street found him, but they didn't know who he belonged to.
Right.
And one of the neighbors was out with him and holding on to him when another neighbor, another gentleman, came out and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I don't know whose dog this is, but something's wrong somewhere." And the other gentleman that had came out was younger, and he took the dog and said, "I'm going to go see if I can find where he is from." And the dog basically walked him back to the property, and he walked upon this. And when he saw Nicole, he immediately stopped and called 911. He's the one who reported it.
JDR, the 4 students that were killed in Idaho were not awake. They weren't fighting back.
There's one of them that was.
One of them that was.
For sure that we know of.
Nicole and Ron were wide awake, and they fought for their lives.
Ron Goldman had so many defensive wounds. It was unbelievable. His fingers were practically severed.
Yeah.
He had knife stab wounds to his torso. Unbelievably. He had knife wounds in his legs.
Mm-hmm.
He had, there has been talk about theories since all of this that there was possibly 2 assailants at least with 2 knives.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of damage.
They were never able to determine what kind of a blade committed the murder. They never found a murder weapon.
Right.
So all of those things are problematic for the prosecution. Because if there were 2 assailants and 2 different knives used, then that would be a red flag that there would have been 2 assailants, in my opinion.
Right.
Unless
and it's, it's very, like I said, it is very possible that there was 2 assailants in this case. When I see how closely the 2 of them were, it's just baffling how this would have went down, how this actually would have transpired. Because when you see how close their bodies are to one another, it's really bizarre to me.
I fully believe that O.J. Simpson was strong enough to take on both of these people.
How strong O.J. Simpson was. Ron Goldman was equally as strong.
Yeah.
He
younger.
Practiced judo. He was 22 years old, 23 years old, whatever. He was in the prime of his adult life as a young man. He worked out. He was very, very much in shape.
And I will tell you this, adrenaline makes you stronger.
Oh, for sure.
So, and fighting for your life, you would be, it would have not been an easy thing to accomplish, killing these 2 people if it's one person. And then walk away unscathed with nothing on you.
Yeah, it's crazy. Here, I'm going to stop this for a second because I don't really want to keep that up on the screen. It really is so upsetting. Hold on. And for people who don't know and aren't aware of, and who could be watching on the replay, I do want you to see, these are the characters. So this is Judge Ito, Lance Ito, and this is Johnny Cochran, the lead defense attorney. This is Barry Scheck, the DNA expert. And this is F. Lee Bailey, famed F. Lee Bailey. This is Marcia Clark, the lead prosecutor. This is Christopher Darden, who is the second prosecutor on the case. And then we have Mark Furman. We have Cato Kalin. And this is Ron Goldman's father. And Nicole Brown's sister is here, Denise. And they were all except for Ron Goldman, Denise Brown and Kaylin and Furman all gave testimony in the case. Denise talked about how Nicole, she saw Nicole all beaten up. She talked about the domestic violence of her sister and what happened to her sister. Her testimony was very what do I want to say? Compelling as far as the domestic violence that happened in their marriage.
Absolutely. O.J. Simpson is not a good person.
Oh, God, no.
I have never once stood up and said that he was anything other. He is not
I'm going to show another picture, you guys. Just giving you a shout out that this is explicit. But here is a picture of it. So these are the police officers. You can see, Nicole, where I was talking about where they would have been standing when they walked past that night, the couple coming home from dinner.
Right there where the policemen are.
And right there where the policemen are, the blood is clear up to that point.
Yep.
You have just enormous amounts of blood. This blanket that was here wasn't here. This was put here by the crime scene techs to walk on so that they supposedly wouldn't track. Excuse me. Track evidence or track stuff onto the evidence.
Yeah.
But they're actually tracking on the evidence. This whole area is crime scene. That made no sense right there. But Ron Goldman, she laid right here at the bottom of these steps is where she laid. And Ron Goldman is right here.
He's over here to the left, right?
He's right here to the left, up against a fence.
Mm-hmm.
He's leaned up against a fence, like onto one shoulder, and he's kind of slumped over, and his legs are out, kind of. One of them is kind of bent, and he's just like that. Is how he fell. It looks like it's how he fell. It's almost as if he sat down and leaned against this fence and then slumped over. It's very strange to see. But this case and the collection of this evidence in this small space, there are tracks of blood that go all the way down the side of the condo. Because if you walk up these steps, you have to take a right and you go into Nicole's front door. But if you keep going right, you go to the side of her condo, and there's a sidewalk that walks all the way to the back of it, where there is a garage and there is a driveway back there where the cars would park that would come to visit her. Most people didn't come this way. They came through the back, walked the side, and then came in that way. But I mean, because that's where her parking area was back behind her house. So anyway, that just shows you the amount of blood. And I still say, because of that, that has always been a contention for me, because he was never covered in blood. They never saw anything like that of him.
Nope.
That always bothered me.
Clothes.
They couldn't find clothes. They couldn't find a weapon. They had so little evidence. I mean, it really was incredible.
Yeah. The fact that he even got indicted really just kind of surprises me.
I think he got indicted because, like I said, he was famous. It was a rush to judgment.
So like the blood evidence, the timeline, and the glove are all of my 3 red flags in this case.
Here is OJ, the famous scene in court where OJ is trying on the bloody gloves. One of these gloves was found on the Bundy property under a bush right over near Ron Goldman and right by the sidewalk where you saw the blood. It was just laying there. The other one was found by Ron Furman, Jesus, was found by Mark Furman behind Cato Kalin's wall. And the assumption was that he made those pounding sounds when he jumped the fence to come into his property. after parking his Bronco out front? Why would he go around to the back of his property to come in the house? Why wouldn't he have just walked right through the front gate and through the front door? Why would he have jumped a fence and come up behind the property where Cato was at? That made no sense. But anyway, that's where that glove was supposedly found. The sock that had a drop of Nicole's blood on it, and some blood of OJ's, has always been the contention it was planted. And that blood evidence was planted. The blood evidence that was found on the back gate at Nicole's house, there were 2 droplets. That blood was not collected until 2 months after the murders. It was never collected the day of the murders, the day when everybody was there. And that is also the contention of the defense, that blood was planted. And that's why there was missing blood from the vial that Van Adder carried around with him all day. That day was, well, we will make this stick. Now, I know that that's not something that any of us want to think about or believe in our police force, but the corruption in Los Angeles was well known. This is not something that was uncommon for police officers in Los Angeles County to do, and especially to Black men. And when you're racist and you don't like interracial marriage, that can even make it even more so of wanting to do that to someone. Oh cripe. I've got one more picture here. And this is where they found the bloody glove. So it's right there. And I just think it's ridiculous. I think those gloves, both of them were left here at this scene, is what I think. And one of them was picked up and taken to the Rockingham estate. I just don't believe that one glove was left. That's what I've always felt.
That, or somebody committed the murder trying to frame OJ.
Yep.
And
which
left
is quite
there,
possible as well.
And then left a glove, and then threw the glove over the wall of his house.
But the evidence,
none of that was evidence, so you can't. I mean, the evidence, the only evidence you can go on based on the gloves is where they were found, and then him putting them on.
Right. Well, in the decades following, the verdict, there's been many decades that's followed since this. There's been several explanations as to why he was acquitted. They've talked about the attorneys messing up. They've talked about law enforcement messing up. How Judge Ito didn't have control of the case, and how they all made serious mistakes. But there are many, many people out there that do believe that OJ was acquitted because they did not prove their case. OJ wrote a book in 2012.
Beyond reasonable doubt. You have to add that in there.
Yeah, beyond a reasonable doubt. Exactly. And the burden of proof is on the state.
Yep.
The defense doesn't have to say or prove anything. That's the way our justice system works. Whether you like it or not, put yourself in a position of being accused of a double homicide or of a homicide at all. And you would want the same things afforded to you. Whether you committed the crime or didn't, you would want the same justice, and you would want people to be fair and truthful and honest. I think one of the things that hurt OJ after this was the fact that he wrote a book. and talked about if he had done it, this would have been how he would do it. And I think that was insensitive, and I think people saw it as such. Jason, OJ's oldest son, has always been a person of interest to many people in this case. That there was a private investigator named William C. Deere who also believed that his oldest son, Jason, committed this crime. I don't know if that's putting information out there, again, calling into the universe about somebody that you have no evidence to say that. But Jason had been convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and was on probation the evening that Nicole Brown was killed. And his conviction was related to an incident in which he had attacked his previous boss with a knife. Authorities never looked at Jason as a suspect or a person of interest in these murders ever. After OJ was acquitted, several jurors were interviewed and asked why they determined he was not guilty. And there was one juror, Brenda Moran, who said in plain English, the glove didn't fit. And she also said the prosecution's focus on accusations that Simpson abused his former wife was a waste of time. And there was a huge amount of focus on that. They had a ton of evidence on the domestic violence.
But again, that makes him a horrible person. That doesn't make him guilty of murder.
Right. Another juror, David Aldana, said that the evidence presented against O.J. Simpson just didn't add up, and so was confident in his decision to find him not guilty.
Because you have to think about it. So the jurors, you're sitting on this case and you've been on it for 8 months and you've heard all of this testimony, and now you have to sentence this man to probably life or death. I don't remember what.
It wasn't a death penalty case.
I didn't think it was a death penalty.
He was looking at life.
Life in prison.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, if I'm sitting on a jury, you're going to have to pretty darn well convince me beyond a reasonable doubt. Like, there can't be any question in my mind based on your evidence that this person did that. When you're looking at that kind of a sentence.
Another juror, Lionel Cryer, he said that the other jurors felt there was a lot of opportunities for contamination of the evidence based upon what they witnessed, not only in photographs, but in the documentation from the forensic scientists that were present at the crime scene, as well as the crime scene technicians themselves. In Cryer's opinion, the evidence that was presented was garbage in and garbage out. And again, as I spoke of earlier in the very beginning, they talked about the fact that it was racially motivated, his acquittal. 9 jurors were Black. However, the Columbia Law School professor Patricia Williams argues that the verdict had nothing to do with race. In her opinion, the jurors made their decision based solely on the evidence that was presented at trial. And sadly, the prosecution simply did not meet the burden of proof. University of Virginia law professor Alec Johnson further disputes claims that race was a factor in the jury's verdict. As Simpson was a wealthy celebrity, Johnson said he had essentially distanced himself from a very large portion of the Black community. Therefore, it is unlikely that the jurors felt any affinity towards Simpson in that regard. Others have blamed that the media coverage of the case was influencing the behavior of the participants and possibly influencing members of the jury. Lori Levinson, who teaches criminal law at Loyola in Los Angeles, said that Judge Lance Ito's decision to allow the entire trial to be televised essentially turned the case into a reality TV show. The live coverage turned the focus away from the facts of the case and caused an unreasonable distraction. The prosecution received much of the blame for the acquittal. They failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. However, in her opening statement, Deputy District Attorney Marcia Clark said, "The trail of blood from Bundy through his own Ford Bronco and into his house in Rockingham seemed to provide enough evidence for a conviction." She would be wrong. Because the reports of the collected evidence included a single glove found at the crime scene and a single glove found outside O.J. Simpson's home, which contained a trace amount of Ron Goldman's DNA. In addition, drops of Nicole's, Simpson's, Goldman's, and O.J.'s blood were found inside the Bronco and on a sock of O.J.'s. And Nicole's blood was also found inside Simpson's bedroom. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that the blood and the DNA evidence were simply not enough to secure that conviction. Mark Furman was the bloody glove person who found it.
And they discredited him on the stand. So that's a lot of people, wondered why the defense questioned him on whether he used the N-word or not. So when you have someone on the stand that, is, you need to be able to believe what it is that they're telling you. And a lot of their evidence was evidence that he supplied. And so by discrediting him and proving that he lies, well, now you wonder what he tells the truth about.
Yes, because it was not only revealed about his racist remarks, which were horrific, but he had also physically assaulted several suspects throughout his career. He was not a good cop.
No.
And when you finally discredit a cop,
then you have a big problem.
Everything that they have touched within that case makes it tainted. And Marcia Clark said later on, one of her worst mistakes was ever putting him on the stand as a witness.
But she really didn't have a choice.
Right.
Who else was she going to call? He was the one who gathered the evidence.
And ultimately, when Furman, was the person who his reliability as a witness came into question, and as a police officer at the scene, it also brought all the pieces of evidence into question that he brought about, which was the blood in the Bronco.
Yep.
And the bloody glove and the sock. And so it just created more reasonable doubt.
You just saw all of those crime scene pictures. And you can't sit here and tell me that he would have had 1 or 2 drops of Ron and Nicole's blood on his sock, and that was it. There is no way possible. It was a bloodbath.
Oh, Mitzi, it was terrible. I remember people fighting and arguing, and it was crazy how people took to the streets, and people went nuts about this.
People we know is a retired judge, and we love to debate this case with him.
Yes.
It's fun.
I know. I often wonder how his kids are doing, because he did end up going to prison. And
in reality, they lost both parents.
Even
if he had never gone to prison, he's living with this shadow over him for the rest. He's, it's not good at all for the kids in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And Dave, there are many police departments out there that screw cases up. Trust me. You can go, there's a big case that you should go look at from Ada, Oklahoma. And that's not screwing up. That's corruption, and how they tried to railroad the person in that case, for murder. And they sent him to prison. for a long time. But yeah,
the prosecution in this case wanted a rush to justice. Like Mom was saying, the district attorney was up for re-election, and this would have helped him in that quest. I think if they had taken more time and, followed evidence and leads better, we might have the person who did this in custody.
Right.
But because they didn't take their time and they didn't focus on making sure that they had solid evidence, because even their circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to prove their case.
It's like when you listen to Steve from True Crime Web talk about it, and Perry from Cop Faxx talked about this so many different times on the channel, about when you have a crime scene, you work from the worst possible thing that could happen out.
Mm-hmm.
So you start there first, and then you work your way out. And as you're working the case, just like you said earlier, you look at the evidence, and it's not just one thing here, or you start looking at the totality of the evidence put together. And that's when things just don't start adding up. When you've got a timeline that's being kind of punched holes in by eyewitness accounts, and you choose to ignore that, and that is evidence that can prove your client innocent, that brings your credibility into question.
The jury take a field trip?
Yeah, the jury took a field trip
to Nicole's house.
Yes.
Okay. I was just now sitting here thinking about, I was like, I think they took a field trip out to the house.
Yeah, I mean, if Chris Darden had not put that glove on OJ,
it could have been a different case.
It could have been a completely different case. But when they did
was
that,
a huge catalyst for a lot of the jurors.
That was huge for them.
And it doesn't matter why the glove didn't fit. It doesn't matter if the leather shrunk. It
doesn't matter anything. The point was that it didn't fit.
You could see with your own eyes that it didn't fit.
It didn't fit.
And how do you? I mean, I just don't understand.
And that's one of the things that Dave, you are so right about. The prosecution was outclassed and outmatched in this case. And with that being said, Marcia Clark was a great prosecutor. She had won many cases. She was not a seasoned. She was a seasoned prosecutor. But I think that she was outmatched by.
She was ill prepared. I don't think that. I think if this had been Marcia Clark's choice, I don't think that she would have.
She wouldn't have started the case that day.
But she wouldn't have gone for an indictment when they did. I think this was above her head, and she didn't have a choice in the matter. I think that the district attorney said, well, we're going to trial. I want a conviction. And she did what she could with what she had. And
they did not do enough canvassing, legwork as detectives in this case. And that's part of the problem with them, in my opinion. So it was definitely truly a spectacle. I think that anybody that lived through it will never forget it. You'll always remember where you were during the Bronco chase.
I was in class. I was in Spanish class at school when the verdict came out. And I'm not kidding you. Kids
I was
were
at work
through the hallways. The juice is loose. Just hollering it. And I vividly remember that. I mean, it was, it was it captivated everybody's attention. Like you did.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it was
everywhere.
It was everywhere. And it set the stage for cases going forward. We have become a country and a community of true crime. I don't know how to put it. Not reality TV, but kind of. It's like our cases now live in social media world, because back then there was no social media.
And I think we live in a world of speculation. People want to sit and they want to talk about a case and they want to speculate. Well, I speculate that there was probably two perpetrators in this case, but I have no evidence to that. And I think that's that fine line that we walk in our society, where you have to make sure that you are distinct between fact and theory.
And domestic violence is horrific.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely horrific.
Absolutely.
And I am not trying to dispel anything from that. But just because you do commit domestic violence doesn't mean that you're going to kill your partner.
No.
And that is
and that's why that juror said that they wasted their time.
Yes.
Spending so much time talking about the domestic violence. Should they have talked about the domestic violence? Yes. But it shouldn't have been. I mean, they talked about it for days and days and days.
Yes.
They submitted pictures on multiple occasions. Nobody
911 calls and all of it.
Nobody ever doubted that O.J. Simpson beat his wife.
No.
That was never.
It was already there. It had already been adjudicated. He'd already been to court for it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the prosecution didn't need to delve into that as much as they did. They needed to focus more on their blood evidence or lack thereof.
Yep. But it does go to speak. It does speak to how the courts can or how cases can get a verdict, and the general public absolutely doesn't agree with it, and yet the courts got it right or the jury got it right because the case was not proven to them beyond a reasonable doubt. And when you have someone's life on the line that you're going to put away for life, you better be doggone sure when you vote guilty and not have that doubt, that reasonable doubt.
Because you have to live the rest of your life with that decision.
And I think this case just had too many other factors that could have been looked into. So,
well, I think it was just it was a show from the beginning all the way to the top. The evidence collection was blown. The leads were blown. It was a rush.
Lots of mistakes made.
Lots and it wasn't even one person. It was a team of mistakes.
It taught a lot of law enforcement agencies across the country what not to do in investigation.
And I think that's the frustrating thing. It's not like this was the first homicide. It wasn't like this was a podunk town in Podunk City and wherever. This is LA.
Yep.
They deal with murder cases on the daily. These were seasoned detectives. They knew better. They knew they should have been able to walk into that crime scene and had it down flat. And they failed to do that.
Yep.
And they did not give the prosecution what they needed in order to get a conviction.
Yep. And that was some of the other thing with the blood evidence, that there was preservative found within the blood evidence on the socks and stuff that should never have been there. If it was truly blood from somebody, you wouldn't find preservative in it. Mm-hmm. And that's what led them to believe, the jury, that the blood was planted. And you could see why that is when that was explained by the forensic specialists on the stand. How do you explain that?
Right.
So, but another great case gone over. The O.J. Simpson trial will always be the trial of the century for me. It's what I lived through that was incredible. I still can't.
You still annoy my dad talking about it.
It's just like there's so many things about that case that are just mind-boggling to me, and always will be. But oh well.
We'll probably never know the truth.
And that's it probably is. I mean, do I think that he had a hand in it? In some way, yes.
I think so. But I think he knows more than what he is letting on.
But I don't think there's enough evidence to put him there.
Was he
at
an
that crime
accomplice?
scene that night.
Was he an accomplice? Possibly. There's a lot of ideas and theories that you could come up with.
CJK, you're so welcome. I always know when I cover these controversial cases like this that people don't want to hear because we've talked about it. It's kind of like they're on their hill with their suspect and they're not going to let go of what they believe. No matter, you can argue with them until you're blue in the face. And I'm not here to argue. I was never here to argue tonight. I was here to show what the evidence was, why the jury voted the way they did, and how the evidence was such a mess and how it really didn't add up. And that's why the jury came to the conclusion that they did. Do juries get it wrong? Yes.
Yes.
Do juries get it right? Yes.
Yeah.
But that's why we have a jury system. And you can't expect them to be perfect and you can't expect it. But our justice system is such that when a jury says you're innocent, you're innocent. You're done.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not, the person gets to walk free. That's our justice system in this country. And if you don't like it, then you need to change the justice system.
Are there people that are guilty that have been gotten off? Yep.
It's
and
still
are there people that are innocent been found guilty? Yep.
It's still the best justice system in the world, as far as I'm concerned, as far as our freedoms and what we are allowed to do and get away with in this society versus other societies. So that's what I will say to that. But anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, you guys are welcome.
I've never once said that you guys aren't allowed your opinions, because you are. They're your opinions. I have my opinions about what I think happened.
Sure.
But it's evidence-based. He's not guilty based on evidence.
No. It's always hard.
It is hard to make
cases objectively.
And I sit here, behind my computer screen and never had to sit on a jury trial. So it's really easy for me to sit there and say, well, you can't have your emotions into it, but
I've been on juries. I've been on 2, and I'll tell you, it's not the same when you're looking at somebody for, a hit and run or where life wasn't taken. I've never, ever been in the situation where I was looking at putting somebody in jail for taking a life. And that comes with a very strong burden of proof, in my opinion. And I think if it's a life in prison or the death penalty, there's even a higher bar, or there should be, because that's taking away someone's life. So, but I thank you for being on tonight. I'm glad I got to spend the time with you and see you.
You talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
Who else would I be talking to?
your people. I don't know.
No, I'm very glad that you were here with me to do this.
No, it was fun. I love to talk about this stuff. You know that.
Yep.
And it was funny because I texted her, called her earlier today, and I was like, do we have an outline for tonight? Because believe it or not, we don't script any of this. It's just off the cuff discussion, and as it.
Yep. I don't ever script my shows. I just don't. I can't. I think
this is fun then.
I don't want it to be scripted. I'd rather it be real and in real time. So
and this case is how many years old? 30?
1994.
We've had many discussions about.
It'll be the 30th anniversary will be next June. And it's hard to believe that it's been 30 years ago, but yeah, what a shock.
Isn't that crazy?
Mm-hmm. How time flies when you're having fun.
Doesn't it though? I feel bad for the families.
You too. I feel bad for Ron Goldman's family.
Yeah,
I feel, they did get their $1 million settlement in civil court against OJ, but they've never seen a dime of that money. So, I mean, I just, in my mind, I do feel for the families. I feel for both families, because
I do too.
I said this the other night. There are never any winners in a murder case.
Nope.
In either side, you're gonna. families are destroyed.
Mhm.
And it's that
And the
simple.
poor
And
kids in this one specifically, I think, are caught in the middle because they still love their dad.
exactly.
I think that sometimes that
Oh, Mitzi, you are so sweet.
that people
I
lose
like
that
listening to
sight.
others' perspectives and opinions. Thank you both. I'd want you to debate for me anytime.
I'm a very good debater. I will admit that.
I
'Cause
love debating.
I don't debate with my emotions
But yeah,
or my thoughts.
I thank you guys for being here tonight. I hope you guys will all join in on Saturday for Delphi. We're going to talk
I
about
won't be
Richard.
here Saturday.
We're going to talk about Richard Allen. So I look forward to seeing you all. But thanks, Shelby, for being here. Good
Yep,
night,
it's
my
fun.
dear.
All right. See you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. For those of you that catch it on the replay, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting my channel. And I will see you guys all on Saturday night. Good night, everyone.